What are you in a resort, buddy?
I'm on the back porch of Bonney HQ, Howard.
Oh, Bonnie XHQ. Okay, that's
Yeah, I have to hide back here. It is April 1st, and so this morning, my wife and I presented our children with a press release saying how the county was requiring all students to repeat the grade level, excuse me, for this year. They'll have to repeat the grade for next year. It was an April Fool's joke. It did not go well in terms of the reaction we got from the kids. So since about 8 o'clock, I've been hiding on the back porch. So hopefully the sounds will all stay nothing more than soothing birds and wind for everyone here on the end of the day. But yeah, this is the safest place for me to be, buddy.
well, my wife was born on April Fool's Day, so I do not get to do April Fool's anything.
Yeah, that's probably a good decision on your part.
She had several older brothers who would do horrible things to her on her birthday, and so I have had a peaceful marriage for 30 years by understanding that I do not have April Fool's Day in my house.
Awesome.
Thanks, Leff, for coming in at the end of the day here. We've had a pretty action-packed day, and we had a lot in the morning around team and really prospecting, which was really some great material. And then we kind of pivoted around lunchtime around talent and getting teams to perform. And Jamie just did an amazing job of kind of helping us understand that, hey, being a leader is kind of rough right now. And she just gave us a lot of fun little, I think there was a lot of good toolkits. And I think your material, I'm assuming that we're going to talk about this idea that this is really down into the meeting woods, where if we're having the meeting, if ever there was a point to maybe be sensitive to understanding situational awareness, it would probably be now.
Mm-hmm. That's true. Yeah, for sure.
So Leff and I have known each other for, I think, a decade now, at least. Yep. And so Leff and I do some work every summer on what's called the Sales Educators Academy, which Leff actually created a few years ago. And once I attended it, I got hooked and I begged to be a contributor. And now I get to do it every year because you give me an assignment to stay up on the technology side of the fence. And anyway, I appreciate every time I listen to one of Leff's presentations, I immediately feel behind on what I'm teaching at UT Dallas, because if you don't know much about sales education, we're all friends and we all compete. And Florida State is a great institution, and Leff is part of the reason that it's a great institution, because Leff keeps on working with partners, working and consulting, and really identifying how to get effective, how to be effective. He teaches in the classroom, but he also consults out in the field. He's one of the few academics that I know that actually has an active and actually gets paid more than a few bucks a year to actually talk to people about what he knows. And he's developed some very innovative strategies around how to actually move the needle from sales methodology and presentations. And a great friend, a great colleague. I always enjoy listening to him, and I'll turn the time over to you. Do you have a deck you need us to give you host control?
Yeah, that would be great. I was just noticing that I'm not allowed to share at the moment, but okay. I do have a deck that I can pop up. All right, here we go.
To you, and we should be good to go.
All right. Hey, so thanks, guys, and it's always a pleasure to come to this event, so to speak. Howard had me there a couple of years ago. I'm a big fan of everyone who speaks at this, and I know Howard always puts together a great panel. And so I'm a bit honored to be a part of it again this year, so thank you. What I wanted to talk a little bit about is this idea of what if we've been getting it wrong for a long time now, that we want salespeople to follow a consistent sales process or a consistent sales methodology. So I just want to start off my talk today with that question into your head. And then I wanted to just give you a little background background, on me. I am an academic. I do come from the corporate world, so I spent a decade or so in sales and leading sales teams. Went back to grad school, landed at the university, or Florida State University, where I do work in the Sales Institute. And then I also, as he said, spend my time doing lots of consulting. I show this, though, to say I really would have rather have been somewhere else in my career, and someone else even today. Because growing up, I was convinced I was going to be a fighter pilot, right? My dad was a 35-year career veteran of the Air Force and a pilot. I knew I was going to follow in his footsteps. And so really, I never thought I would be here talking to Howard Dover and UT Dallas students and leaders of sales teams about sales. I was going to be in the sky, going at a million miles an hour in some radical machine. Right. So my heroes growing up were always, sort of the legends of flight, right? The Wright brothers, people like the Red Baron and Pappy Boynton and Richard Bong, who I'm sure a lot of people on the call don't even know who I'm talking about. Maybe if we come a little more forward in history, some people might have heard of guys like Chuck Yeager and John Glenn and Neil Armstrong, who were some of the greatest pilots to ever walk the earth. Even if you can't relate to what I'm talking about, maybe you at least know these two guys as some of the greatest pilots to ever live. Snoopy flying his bi-wing fighter that was his doghouse, or at least Maverick from Top Gun. Now, I'm dating myself with the Maverick reference, but luckily there was another Top Gun coming out. So maybe this reference will come back around as a useful tool in the near future. But even if you've never heard of any of these guys, or even if you have heard of some of these guys, I bet you've never heard of this guy, right? And his name was John 42nd Win Boyd. And John Boyd is one of the most decorated Air Force pilots to ever live. But the interesting thing about him is he never flew a single actual combat mission. And the reason he was so famous was because John Boyd was the best instructor to ever walk the earth. And he was even called the 42nd Win Boyd because John would often bet people who would come to fighter pilot school that he could go up in the air and beat you in 40 seconds. So if you guys said go into your microphones and you had a dogfight in the sky, John said he could beat you in 40 seconds. And the legend is that he never lost that bet. So John Boyd goes off to the fighter weapons school. That's where we train fighter pilots at Nellis Air Force Base out in Las Vegas. And he gets there, and his sort of prowess as an instructor becomes pretty evident pretty quickly. Students learn under him. People go on to have great fighter pilot careers that learn from him. And so a new commander came to the fighter weapons school, and he found John, and he said, "John, I want you to tell us what's wrong with how we're training fighter pilots. You've been here for several years. I want you to sort of put together a what's wrong and then get back to me." So here's what Boyd came up with. He said, one of the biggest weaknesses we have is that we're throwing way too much information at our fighter pilots. If you think of the cockpit of a fighter pilot, it is basically several computers all put together throwing information at a pilot at a high rate of speed. And as that technology continued to advance, John was saying, our fighter pilots can't keep up with the amount of information that we're throwing at them. He also said our pilots are becoming too consistent, maybe a bit of a foreshadowing there. He said they're starting to use the same maneuvers over and over again in air combat, and that's becoming an issue. He also said that we're not using enough dope. And I know some of you may be a little worried that our military has a term called dope. We'll get to what that is in a minute. And then finally, he said, we're too busy, or we too often take a one-size-fits-all approach to the aircraft design that we are building. And so the leader of this fighter weapons school said, "Okay, John, so what do we do about it?" And so the first thing John went off and did is he said, we need to come up with what do we want the pilot to do? What is it that what's our goal for pilots? And he came up with this thing called the OODA loop. And the OODA loop is where he said, I want our pilots to be able to very quickly observe what's going on in a battle, come up with the conclusion or sort of an orientation of what's happening and what's about to happen, make some decisions on what his or her choices are, and act on those choices. And then sort of rinse and repeat, right? So as the battle plays out, I want this to continue to happen. And Boyd's contention was, if our pilots can through this process quicker and more accurately than the bad guys, we're going to win an awful lot of air wars, right? And so he said, that's great. So how do we do that? And he said, well, the first thing we have to do is quit telling our guys and gals to focus on so much information. And what he did is he came back and said, really, it's 4 key pieces of information is all a pilot ever needs to know to be effective in a dogfight. Enemy type, altitude, speed, angle of attack. That's it. If they know those 4 things, then they're going to be successful in a battle. But he said, more importantly, we need them to be able to then take that information and come to some conclusions about it. So if we're fighting this kind of plane and they're at 13,000 feet and they're going 500 knots and they're coming up at us from a 45-degree angle, well, then what that means is we're in a better position and we've got a better airplane than they do, okay? So he wanted people to take information and put it into a conclusion really quickly. This then, right, became a pretty important tool, because then he came up with this thing called the when-to guide, right? He wrote this thing called the aerial attack study. And what the aerial attack study did is it not only taught people, well, here's how you actually do certain maneuvers, okay? So in this case, I think this is called a shallow scissor, or whatever that means. And they taught people how to do it, but then they also came back and said, so, right, when you're in this position of having that superior position and better aircraft, this is where you should run this shallow scissor maneuver. And so for the first time, the Air Force pilots had sort of this when-to guide. They'd been taught how to for years. They'd never been taught when to. When do I do certain maneuvers over others, okay? To solve this DOPE problem, right? So DOPE in the military stands for data on previous engagement. So how do we look back, learn from what happened in a past dogfight or past air battle, and learn from that go forward? And so John Boyd went down to Louisiana where they had a supercomputer. He put in all kinds of information and he acted on past battles that had happened. And he was actually able to write multiple attack studies saying, if you're in this kind of plane, here's your when-to guide. And if you're in this kind of plane, here's your when-to guide. And then finally, the last thing is he told people, we have to stop with this infatuation with speed, right? In the Air Force, it was all about speed. If we can have faster planes, we'll surely be more successful. And he came back and said, no, it depends on the mission. If trying to support our troops on the ground, having a fast plane does no good. We actually need slower planes that can circle overhead and provide support. So I know everybody on the call today is like, man, this guy's on the back porch. He's breathing pollen. He's had a bad day with his kids. He's lost his mind. Right? What world does this have to do with sales enablement or sales leadership of any kind, really, for that matter? And what I want to sort of put in front of you today is I think the parallels of those problems that John Boyd brought up to his leader are actually very relevant in today's sales organizations. So what do I mean by that? Remember that the first weakness was, he said, there's too much information flying around, right? We're asking our fighter pilots to absorb too much information. We're doing the same thing to our salespeople. We're creating these crazy CRM dashboards that have so much information on them, they're almost impossible to decipher, and they're not simple to pay attention to. Then on top of that, when you get a salesperson in a meeting discussing an opportunity with their manager, the manager asks them about 40 different aspects of the opportunity, like when's this customer going to make a decision, and are they cost focused or not cost focused, or are we dealing with influencers or decision makers? And we overwhelm the salesperson with everything we're asking them to pay attention to in a sales opportunity. And what we know from research that we've done at FSU, as well as reading research from other academics around the country, is high performing salespeople actually pay to fewer opportunity factors, right? So what I mean by that is they're not trying to absorb the world. They're observing 4 or 5, maybe 6 key factors, But the difference is they have a much more accurate and clearer, sharper view of those factors. So if you were to compare their answers to, hey, where is this customer on those 6 factors? They would have higher accuracy and more details about those 6 factors than a lower performing salesperson. So what we have to do is start to help our sellers understand when you're working on an opportunity, don't try to absorb the world. Pay attention to a few factors. Now, the important thing to remember here is these factors are also specific to the industry. So it's often that we read books that say, oh, you need to pay attention to speed and decision making, who's making the decision, how many competitors are involved. Those are all good factors, but sometimes they're irrelevant in certain industries. And so what we have found in our research at FSU is that these factors we should be paying attention to, it matters what industry people are in. And you're seeing on the screen here, when we did high performer interviews and we said, what are you paying attention to in a medical equipment sale? You see the 6 or 7 factors there, but when we went to somebody who sells senior living, assisted living apartments, we found a completely different set of factors that high performers were paying attention to. So a lesson here for us is to work with the field, and as a manager, try to work with your salespeople to come up with what are the relevant sort of opportunity factors I want my team paying attention to, and block out everything else, right? Try to keep them from having to absorb the world. Another note that we found in terms of research is high-performing salespeople are able to connect the dots quicker, right? They're able to say, okay, if it's this kind of if it's this kind of competitor with this kind of speed and decision-making with this kind of buyer, I've seen that pattern before, right? They sort of connect the dots really quickly. So what I mean by patterns is we can even prove these out sort of with data. So if you were to go and say, take the medical equipment company and say, hey, do me a favor, take every opportunity that you've worked on in the last few months and rate those opportunities based on these factors. So how big was the buying team? How well did the customer understand their problem? Had they bought a solution like this before? Were they open to change? Rate this opportunity on these factors and do it over and over again for all the different opportunities that you're working on. And you can plug that into some math and actually come out with patterns, right? So what we found in the medical equipment companies, they actually found their salespeople were involved in 5 different types of sales opportunities at any given time. Okay, so if we map those factors and we even put some visualization to it, we can see that there are across hundreds and thousands of opportunities, there are lots of different, or only 5 different patterns that salespeople need to be aware of. So this is what we have to help sellers get to quicker. Our high performers can do this naturally. Other people need help. If you give them the rating scale and say, rate the factors for this opportunity, and we know that it's one of these 5, then we can use AI technology to actually match and say, hey, you're probably dealing with a tell me what's new opportunity, or hey, you're probably dealing with a slightly the same opportunity, right? So the next thing is to try to work with the field to determine their opportunity profiles. Are there sort of common situations that our team is in that we want them to learn and start to recognize quickly out in the field? And can we use some technology that may be able to help them out? I presented this the last time I was with Howard and the group there. I'm going to go through it quickly. I'm going to want to relive it. But another part of our research is that there really are multiple ways to sell, right? This myth of, hey, I was at IBM for 20 years and this is how I sell, and I guarantee if you do it this way, you'll be successful. That's crazy because we've all been in sales, or a lot of us on this call have been in sales. We don't sell the same way in every opportunity, okay? And so the idea here is what are some of those patterns or strategies that are in play? In our research with over now 6,000 salespeople, it's usually one of these 4. So we all know what consultative selling is. We're going to go ask some good questions. We're going to build a solution. We'll come back and present it. We all know what product selling is. It's, hey, you know what? It really is important to educate the customer on what my product does and why it's better than a competitor's. And that's really what I'm leaning on in this particular sales situation. Like the challenger sale or disruptive selling, where I'm going to go in and I have to actually sort of confront the customer a little bit and say, you know what? you have a little bit of your view of the world is a little off here, and I need to challenge you on that. That's disruptive selling. And envision selling is sort of taking where the customer wants to go but doesn't know how to get there, and helping them build a path. You're really selling a change management program in vision selling versus a product. And what we found is average salespeople usually pick one of these, and they live in this box all the time. They were super consistent, actually. The myth of our salespeople aren't consistent is just that. It's a myth. You're really underperforming salespeople probably struggle, but your middle of the road average sellers are stuck in one of these boxes. They're doing it over and over and over again, no matter what the situation. And what we found is when you go to high performers and you study what they're doing, what you find is between different situations, they're actually using different strategies. And so the real trick here is to actually teach our salespeople how to be systematically inconsistent, not consistent to the same sales process over and over again. But we need that other data, right? We need that other insight that says, hey, what are our situations first? Then let's come back and teach people how do we actually align these sales strategies to the situations that they face, right? That's the trick. And that's what we have to start doing it better on as coaches. So if you're a direct coach of salespeople, we have to start helping them align these strategies to different situations. And if you're an enablement or more of a senior leader, this has to be a more of a systematic process across the organization. Playbook should be like this as well. I don't know how many times I look at a playbook and I say, hey, this is great, but there's two problems. One of two problems. One is you've tried to write the world into this playbook, meaning you've tried to cover every contingency, and it's a playbook that's about 100 pages thick, and it doesn't teach the salesperson when do I do one thing over another. The other mistake is that it's overly simplistic, and salespeople look at it and they say, I could use this playbook in some situations, but not in others. We have to build situational playbooks, not process playbooks. So another lesson here of the OODA loop from John Boyd is we got to provide multiple paths to success. What about this dope thing? Should we be doing dope in sales? Right? Do we need data on previous engagements in sales? And the answer is absolutely. I don't think we do a well enough job looking backwards at our past engagements to try to learn and see what we're going to do. So if we have these opportunity types that I pointed out earlier, what percentage of these types make up your current deals, right? You need to know that, because if we know that 27% are stuck in the corner and 20 are reactive, we can kind of keep an eye on that in terms of our pipeline and know, well, first of all, maybe our salespeople are bringing in too many of the wrong kinds of deals, right? We don't win those kinds of deals. We win other kinds of deals. And so we have to be careful with that, right? And then the other issue is making sure we think about what works. Okay, so what I mean by that is if we use data on previous engagements and we know what kind of situation it was, and we know what kind of strategy the salesperson tried to use, then we can also then take a look at, did we win or did we lose? And if we have those three key pieces of data, now this becomes the money ball of sales, because we can go through and actually say, in selling situation number one, a product focused is our best chance of winning. In selling situation number two, disruptive works the best, and so on and so forth, right? We need this kind of data from past engagements so we can give the salespeople some guidance on what they should be doing going forward. So when it comes to this decide step, we need data-driven approaches for prescribing the best path. We have to stop with the antidotes. We have to stop letting somebody in marketing tell us what it is. We need to actually use data to come up with what should we be doing when we're in these situations. Which brings us to the last weakness, right? So in Boyd's world, they were building airplanes that were built for speed, speed, speed. And they weren't taking into account what was the mission and what did we need to be doing to try to win that mission. And so once he got his hands on, and he did eventually get to the Pentagon and start helping them design aircraft, he started building aircraft that aligned with the missions that they were trying to execute. We have to work with our marketing partners, right? We have to go to marketing with this data that says, hey, look, here's the situations my guys find themselves in, or my gals find themselves in. Here's what the data shows works in terms of a selling strategy. Now build me tools that can support that. Build me a disruptive brochure and build me a product brochure and build me a consultative brochure. And your marketing friends are going to hate this because now you're telling them that they have to actually take one concept or one product and perhaps build 4 different selling tools for it. But they should, right? Because what the salesperson needs to be disruptive is not the same thing they need when they're trying to take a product-focused approach, even perhaps for the same product in a particular sale. So last lesson here is we have to liaise with marketing, right? Marketing is our weapons designers. And so as fighter pilots of sales, we need to go to them and say, here's what we're trying to accomplish, and here are the tools that we need to get that done. So Howard, I think I flew through that. I know we didn't take questions as we went. I was hoping a little bit of a light analogy here at the end of the day might be a fun way to think about this new thing of being more situational in our sales efforts. And so I'll pause here and just see if anybody has questions over what was probably a way too fast presentation of that.
So I'm gonna wait to see if we have any questions that pop up, Leff. And so can you maybe describe a little bit, how did you kind of come to this realization?
Yeah, it's a little quick, interesting story. So at our institute, like you guys, we have sponsored companies. And back in 2011, they came to us and they said, listen, this Challenger Sales book is really sort of turning sales on its head, challenging sort of the current thinking on sales. Is it for real? Can you go out and actually do some research to come back and tell us, A, is it really a thing? And B, is it as effective as, the Challenger folks say it is? And so if I just back up really quickly, that's really where this research got launched, which was, let's go even figure out if there's such a thing as Challenger selling, right? We knew consultative selling existed, we knew that product pitch selling exists, but what about this Challenger selling? And we did. So through lots of interviews with salespeople, it kind of became apparent disruptive was real. But through those interviews, we also kind of came back and said, well, it looks like this vision thing is the real deal also, or exists out there. But then the real thing then the real secret became, though, which of these works best? And so then we did a survey where we gave people these sort of different scenarios, and we said, hey, go ahead and tell us what you would do. But they didn't know they were telling us consultative selling or disruptive selling. They were just telling us tactics that they would use. But ultimately what it showed was that in some situations, high performers were using this consultative thing. In some situations, they were using disruptive. So the big aha for us when we got back to our institute and started talking to our board members, it was like, hey, it's not really what is the best selling methodology. It's which one is the best selling methodology for the situation that you're in. And that whole idea of the one size fits all, let's teach people to be consistent robots doing the same thing over and over again, is actually what average salespeople do already. If we want to take our sales force from average to better than average, we have to sort of embrace this systematic inconsistency. But what I was hoping to show with the story of John Boyd is it kind of takes a village, right? It takes a whole system of thinking within the company, from a sales enablement person to a manager to a salesperson to training, right? We have to kind of think, and even to marketing, we have to kind of be thinking about these things like missions. And what does it take to be successful, and how do we teach our guys and gals to go execute the mission for the right situation?
We have 2 questions, so let me read them off for you. So the first one is, Leff, in the absence of the deal profile info at our firm, perhaps it would be useful to have win reviews on a regular basis to collect and discuss this type of information. Would also serve training and data collection needs over time. Do you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. We went out and interviewed, by the way, before, when we came to the conclusion that we have to teach the systematic inconsistency. We went out and talked to the military guys and said, how do you do this? And the debrief part of it on that dope thing was so important for them to be able to say, let's replay the mission. What kind of situation were you in and what did you try to do? And have that one-on-one sort of coaching debrief to say, let's just even try to figure out what happened and what did we try. So to do it in sort of that qualitative way, anecdotally, so to speak, is fine. And in some ways on a one-on-one coaching basis is a great way to do this. You don't have to have the data in a CRM system to do this. So we use a survey method to come in and say, tell us about your last two deals. Tell us about your last two deals. And then we have them sort of break down those factors and rate those deals on those factors. And if you do that across enough salespeople, you don't even have to have it in your CRM system. You can just use sort of a survey-based starting point to start to build some of these profiles, like here. And then from this point forward, sort of these factors into a CRM system, and you can start tracking it going forward.
Okay, another question, and this has got several parts from John Downey. Said, outstanding info. Wants to know if you can get copies of the slides, and let us know if we can actually post your presentation. So that will be, if you give us permission, we'll put it out on the website. He asked, what companies are you seeing doing this well?
The companies that do this well don't see it as a training engagement. So usually when we get called to do this, it's usually like, hey, can you come do some training for us? And we always come back to this question, well, what do you need trained? Do you need consultative or disruptive product? And most of the time they look back and say, well, we don't know. We were thinking consultative, but are there other choices? And that opens us up to this conversation to say, well, yeah, there are other choices, and we need some data to what works here and what doesn't work here, and those kinds of things. So that's usually how those get started. The problem is people go, okay, great, come train on disruptive selling, because the data shows that in reluctant review situations, which make up most of our situations, we need to be disruptive. Our guys and gals don't do that now, so come do it for us. Come teach us how to do that. And then that's like full stop, end of sentence, period. Like it's an event. And we've heard this from lots of other training. Can't just be an event. This can't be an event either, right? So the companies that do this best, their sales enablement team grabs this and says, okay, after our folks go through initial training on different situations and what to do, we're going to constantly be putting these things back in front of them in the form of case studies that illustrate a reluctant review customer and how somebody won it using disruptive. We're going to have the CRM system have sort of like, hey, do you think you're dealing with a reluctant review? Do you want to see the playbook that goes with that and how to run a disruptive play in that scenario? Here, click here and you can get that data. You can get that playbook in real time. So taking this and building it as if it's a system that's going to be alive and well inside your business at all times is what works. And the last thing I'll say about that too is that also implies these change over time, right? So you need someone sort of sitting back monitoring this, monitoring some of that data, or at least doing spot checks verbally, anecdotally with the sales force to say, hey guys, are you still seeing reluctant review? And if they say no, then we need to know something's going on out there. So this has to take on, it's really a thought process, not some training event within a company.
So I'm going to try and read this. The meaty part of the question was, I agree that we provide way too much info and perform way too much sales cadence versus coaching after learning more about client position and technology adoption, early adopter, laggard, et cetera, and coach them. Did you look for that view based on where is C-level executives and management to be input into the adoption curve? So I see the adoption curve. I'm trying to understand, is that the adoption curve of the company or the internal or external? I don't quite understand the question, John. But adoption curves related to technology, do you find that impacts things much?
Do you mean it? So I'll ask you, are you saying adoption by the sales force of adopting this?
So John's clarified. He said, it's the adoption curve of the company. What about, if a company is very, early or late in their adoption curve of a technology and being sophisticated, does that have much – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – ––
Oh, got it. Well, so I'm gonna assume what you mean is, does the sales force adopt this? And I would, or do they embrace? Maybe a better term is, do they embrace it? And what we have found when we come in and talk like this to salespeople is, you get them sort of leaning in, saying, finally, for the first time, somebody's not coming in here with a generic sales strategy telling us it's going to work in every situation we get into. You're actually talking to the realities of everyday sales. And so for those, especially more experienced salespeople, they tend to really buy into this as a methodology, because it's what's been bouncing around in their heads for 20 years anyway. And so they're going, gosh, finally somebody's trying to break this down into different plays that we need to execute based on the situation that we're in. That's how we have to think about this. The other thing is, we usually get the high performers involved, right? So when we figure out that there are these kinds of situations, the smart thing to do is bring your high performers in and say, hey, let me paint a picture of this reluctant review opportunity. What would you do here? Tell us what you're doing to win. Now, we know from the data that there might be running this play to be successful. Sorry for the bouncing around, but we can look at the data and say what they should be doing. But this doesn't give us like a robust sort of picture of what are the key messages they're delivering, and how do they phrase things, and what tools do they bring to the table in these situations, et cetera. So getting your high performers to sort of add color to this, color commentary, and say, okay, yeah, in this situation, I would use a product focused pitch, but here's what I would do to make sure that went well. And so when you're starting to go into the training session saying, hey, in these situations, your high performers are the ones saying you guys should do this, we're not the ones saying you should do it, the buy-in across the rest of the company is off the chart. So this just has all kinds of things going for it, so to speak, when you roll it out to the sales organization, because it's data from in their business. They understand it. It speaks their language. And then their high performers have their fingerprints all over it, making it come to life inside the company.
So coming back to the beginning of the question, are there any specific companies that you would say are probably fairly far along in deploying this kind of thinking?
Yeah, I mean, you think the crux of the question is, do they want me to name them? I mean, I'm happy to. So if that's what this person means.
No, it is. In fact, if there's a couple of examples, or they can reach out to you and ask those questions, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah. I mean,
at
if
the
they
end of
want
your
to, and I
segment.
could even, and I'll be to connect them with some of our contact and some of the companies where we've done this, so they can sort of hear, is it really working? But again, so I just sort of answer it the same way I answered her. This works best when you have support people who can keep it alive well. So at FSU, when we come in and help set this up at companies, we don't want to be there for the next 10 years. We're not equipped to be there for the next 10 years to keep this. Like, you have to be able to hand this to someone, and someone in the business has to own this. And so maybe a better way of saying, is there a company where this works well? If there's a company that has resources that can bring people and resources to the table to keep this going, yes, that's the best company to do this. If it's a company that says, we want something kind of cool and unique for the next training thing we're going to do, this isn't a good thing this isn't what that's for.
So I think the key thing you're trying to say, and I've seen you present this many times, is that this is not the flavor of the month. This is the, hey, let's make sure we understand the right flavor to apply to the right moment. And so you actually have to have a whole infrastructure that's set up around thinking this way, managing this way, coaching this way, and really enabling the whole organization this way.
Yeah. You said it better than I could, Howard.
Well, it's because I have a PhD.
You're doing a great job.
That's an inside joke. Everybody. Leff has a PhD too.
You have to take the next 3 questions, since you're doing so good at this.
Well, actually, I'm going to switch over to wrap up. So if you want to give the mic back to Stephanie, and actually she already grabbed it back. Thanks a lot, Leff, and stay safe out there in Florida. We hope to see you soon, and down the road, and that we can all get back on planes and enjoy life again. So
that would be great. I hope we can do this in person next time, Howard. Thanks.
Yeah, me too. All right, thank you so much.